Just a quick disclaimer, this may be a longer video, so make sure you guys grab your coffee, protein shake, dinner, late lunch, early dinner. Make sure you guys grab that, and let's get right into this video. Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Tyrone back with Tech Life, and here I wanted to pull up the first half of 2025 overall root score. This is Root Metrics, actually the most, until someone else comes in, this is the most comprehensive scientific testing that we have in the field today. Any other testing is crowdsourced or anecdotal. This is a scientific testing firm. So I just completed a trip that I wanted to discuss in this video while talking about these root rankings. So I just went from El Paso, Texas to Phoenix, Arizona. I stayed in Phoenix for a night. Then the next day traveled to Vegas. On the way, going west, I went on I-10 West. I went through Highway 93, Highway 60, crossing probably a bit, not too much, a little bit on I-40, and then the rest of the way, I think it was Highway 60 going into Henderson and then Vegas. So AT&T is the back-to-back winner. So you can see up in the right corner, it is the first half of 2025. And then what you see at the top below the AT&T here, second half winner, that's just letting you know that AT&T won the second half of 2024. So they are back-to-back winners overall. Now, that's subjective depending on you and your experience. I've seen people discredit Root Metrics, and that will further continue as T-Mobile gets even better. Now, right, we don't want to, how can I say this? We don't want to make excuses for T-Mobile. They're on almost year 6 of the merger. But T-Mobile being at almost a 96, I think that's for where they came from and where they are today, that's impressive. Right? We're talking about a T-Mobile that couldn't invest adequately during LTE. We're talking about Verizon and AT&T that probably spent double the amount of CapEx for years and years and years and years. So T-Mobile is fighting that while they're still trying to improve and compete with today's standard. Regardless of all the spectrum that T-Mobile has, they can have every inch of spectrum in the country. They still need to deploy sites. They still need to go through the process. They still need to go through zoning. That takes time. That takes years in some cases. I've seen it in some counties and municipalities. I've heard it can take up to 4 years to get approval for sites. So that is where T-Mobile still needs time. The spectrum, everything else, it's being deployed. It's already on sites. It's being utilized. It's being monetized. So at the state level is where T-Mobile really struggles. And that's not to say that they're perfect at the metro level. They still have work to do there. But it's closer than ever before. So my experience going from El Paso to Phoenix, right? I tested Verizon against T-Mobile on the way there, both cities. And then I tested AT&T and Verizon when I got to the cities like Phoenix and then Vegas. I got some video footage. And then on the way back traveling, I tested AT&T on the way back. And then T-Mobile I had on my primary line. So on the way there, I will say again, a lot of LTE for Verizon. They struggled in comparison to T-Mobile's mid-band scale. Now, that's not to say that Verizon was completely unusable. They were still usable, but I found a lot of sub 1 megabit per second speeds on Verizon. And that was very noticeable just using the phone, right? Watching video on the way there on Verizon. I watched some Netflix. and I caught some buffering quite a bit more than I want to be willing to admit. Right? And T-Mobile had mid-band. It's the T-Mobile mid-band scale is questionable. Now, I don't want to say that it's a bad thing. It's a good thing. They invested a lot of money. They deployed it. They have reach and scale on N41. They said 2.5 has much further reach than C-band, and they said for Verizon and AT&T to match that reach, they would need to deploy 2 times the sites, and that was mainly for outside. It wasn't in the metro because Verizon is already fairly dense. They had no choice. And I think I'm seeing that now. I'm seeing like, man, I'm on mid-band like 95% of the trip, right? In the middle of, even on I-10, that's a more populated interstate, I'm still getting 700-800 megabits in literally no man land. Like, you got to understand, the East Coast geographic is different from the West. The West, once you travel outside of cities, you're getting nothing but rattlesnakes, cactus, and maybe a few houses here and there in between. But it's like, it's not populated. There's no pops that you're covering except the people that are traveling on the interstate. So getting that speed and having that strong of a mid-band, I just don't know if that's necessarily that important. And I don't know, right, and the point that I'm trying to make, I don't know if it's necessarily like if Verizon and AT&T care to match that scale. I've ran into a lot more 5G on AT&T than Verizon, like a lot more. So AT&T has a lot more sites that have radio swaps. And it wasn't necessarily the C-band. It was a lot of N5 going towards Phoenix and Vegas. But it was still doing 100 and 150 to 200 megabits, which is plenty on that stretch. In some cases, on T-Mobile, I was doing 1.4, 1.5 gigs next to a cactus. So I'm like, I get it. T-Mobile wants to be in the discussion and dominate and do all this, but was that a necessary build, right? Was that absolutely necessary with all of their AWS, PCS, and low band? It would have still been a fine deployment if they would have just had that. I guarantee you on that, I would have been able to do 150, 200 megabits in those areas. Now, that's just in regards to the scale if Verizon and AT&T will match that, right? A lot of people are saying, you know what, it's really not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. But my response to that is why? As long as you swap the radio, you put some of the spectrum on NR, that will allow you to move your core to SA and do voice over NR. It's a fine deployment. Why are you going to touch all sites again? Now, in Verizon's defense, they're going to have to touch all sites anyway to swap those radios, so you might as well put C-band. But AT&T, they've already swapped those radios prior during the FirstNet movement. So now they have a modernized tower, right, that's doing the 200 megabits, but they don't have C-band on the sites because they swapped NR radios prior to that. So now the engineers have to make a decision. Do we want to deploy C-band and DoD and spend additional capital to truck roll to the site itself, possibly endure a higher lease because I have to climb sites and the weight of the site's going to increase, right? All of that is going to be a part of the decision making. But regardless, right, a lot more 5G from AT&T versus Verizon, and then T-Mobile's availability is just, it's not even close. It's not even, the T-Mobile 5G availability is not even close, and all the rankings show that, right? All the crowdsourced, even Root is saying T-Mobile has the availability. So the availability piece, I mean, going through Highway 60, 93, going into Vegas, I mean, T-Mobile is all 5G. I encountered no LTE whatsoever. On the 10 going west, right, and then east coming back, AT&T had more 5G than Verizon. But Verizon was LTE mostly. And then going through Highway 60 from Phoenix to Vegas, about a 4-hour trip or so, AT&T and Verizon both lacked 5G. They were mostly LTE. So availability goes to T-Mobile all day long, and which is fine, right? That's fine. That's T-Mobile has been investing and deploying towards that goal for a lot longer than Verizon and AT&T. So will I say that overall AT&T is the best? I can't say that because my trip data is anecdotal. Was AT&T perhaps the most consistent and stable on the trip? Yes. So I would rank AT&T 1, T-Mobile 2, Verizon in third place. That's how I would rank the trip overall. Now in Phoenix, it was more Verizon 1, AT&T 2, and T-Mobile 3. Because AT&T still has a lot of Nokia there. They have a lot more work to do. Verizon very dense in Phoenix. A lot of C-band, Westgate, millimeter wave. I mean, T-Mobile struggled heavily at Westgate. There was a concert, Morgan Wallen, at the State Farm Arena. It was just, T-Mobile couldn't handle it. They could not handle that traffic. AT&T did much better, but like I said, it's still a lot of Nokia. And then Verizon was just the best in Phoenix. And then Vegas was a lot more interesting, right? Vegas, I would probably rank AT&T 1, Verizon second, and then T-Mobile third. I would have to rank it that way. Verizon has a lot of, and we'll see that come to fruition soon, right? There's still a lot of Nokia that has to be converted to Ericsson, but AT&T made huge improvements. The IDAS are being upgraded. The hotel, I was at the Rio. AT&T was the best. AT&T was the best overall at the MGM Arena. For those of you who saw my posts on X, I mean, they had uplink and downlink. T-Mobile had downlink, no uplink, so couldn't upload anything. And I know for events like that, uplink is everything, right? You're uploading, you're doing all that. And I know some of you are going to say, well, what about Verizon's millimeter wave? Again, it's there. I connected to it maybe twice because I was on the move. Like, I wasn't just walking around testing. I was on the go, right? It's on the strip. You're hopping into a taxi. You're hopping into an Uber. You're going from this location to that location. And the time I did connect to it, I got 3 gigs, but it was shortly, right? I think the longest, which was the second time that I connected to it, was on the old Vegas Strip, Fremont. That's the longest that I connected to it when we were there, because millimeter wave is right there above you. So, you know, you're connected to that. But if you're on the go, you're going into the hotel, out of the hotels, walking, you're connected mostly to C-band. And that's where AT&T shined. AT&T really shined, impressed me. Just there on the strip, right? At the Rio Hotel, AT&T was the best. Then, like I said, the MGM Arena, they were the best inside. At the arena too. And then there was another hotel, I think it was New York. AT&T was the best. AT&T had millimeter wave there at the New York, and doing like 1.6, 1.7 gigs on that connection. T-Mobile was fine in Vegas, but just mostly average. It wasn't like spectacular. It was like 200, 300, 400. Pretty much anywhere at any time, right? I backtracked to 2017 last time I was there, and T-Mobile was a congested mess until about 4 a.m. when everybody left the strip. Now it's usable. So it's 200, 300, 400, pretty much anywhere you go. They have DAS systems now in the hotels, and it's a pleasant experience. So I would definitely, like I said, overall the whole trip, I would say AT&T 1, T-Mobile 2, Verizon in third. As Verizon scales more of its deployments on the interstates, like the C-band, the radio swaps, if they, there's more C-band needed, of course, in Phoenix and then in Vegas too. Once they get all that done, then we'll revisit. But the competition has been steadily improving. And I don't want to say that Verizon has taken that lightly over the years, but it's closer now than it's ever been before, right? For those of you who remember years and years and years ago. I'm talking like 2009, 2010, 2011. Root metrics has been around for a long time. And there used to be, and they were testing even back then. For those of you who remember Cricket, when they had their own CDMA network, all of that was being tested. Cricket was listed on Root back then as the 5th carrier. And the network gap and the Verizon dominance and lead that they had back then was just undeniable. Verizon was at the top for even AT&T couldn't touch them at that time. When they transitioned to LTE, Verizon at times was like in the high 80s, high 90s, and everyone else like T-Mobile, Sprint, they were like in the low 70s, 60s, in some cases 50s from overall testing. AT&T would be like in the low to mid 70s at those times. And Verizon's network dominance through that decade was just insane. If you did not have Verizon during those times, you just did not have a pleasant experience on anything, right? Everybody was still making up their minds on how they wanted to move towards the next technology, right? Sprint was like 3G, and then they were WiMAX in some cities, and then they were starting to do LTE, and then 20% of the market was LTE. The rest of the 80% was 3G. Was a mess. Verizon, they chose one technology and they went guns blazing on that. They invested big, and that's all it took. It didn't take anything special. It was just a decision they made, and they were correct. That's all it took. If the others would have been in the same boat and they would have invested just as heavily, I think the network gap would have been closer even back then. But as close as this is that you see on screen now, I mean, Verizon should have been tied with AT&T. If you look at some of the other scores that are like maybe 0.1, 0.2 behind, and then T-Mobile still has work to do, right? So the calling still affecting T-Mobile. But if they can get that score up, T-Mobile's going to be right there too, right? So, and I'm expecting that to happen within the next 12 to 18 months, right? You take the US Cellular network, the 2,100 sites, you modernize, you get that in, and then now we're talking, right? Now we're talking a much different experience than even what you're seeing now. And I think we'll see that get better. And to be honest, T-Mobile is the most improved versus the second half. If you're looking at the points, I think T-Mobile improved by like 1.8, and Verizon and AT&T, I think like 1.2, if I remember that correctly. So if T-Mobile can keep that up, you guys will see where that's heading, right? So even though we don't want to make excuses for T-Mobile, because it's already like almost year 6 post-merger, but they're going to get better, and they will do what they need to do as a business to get there. US Cellular was what they needed to do, what they felt like they needed to do to be able to really scale the network. Now, if they go after Viero, C-Spire, whoever, and if they feel that's the right move, then that's what they will do. But they will get closer to AT&T and Verizon on this whole overall network. So that's just what I wanted to talk about, discuss in this video, give you guys a review of the trip. I placed calls. I mean, they were all fine, but again, that's anecdotal. Like I said, the scientific testing that Root does is much different, right? So if I place, as an example to close out the video, if I place 1 or 2 calls or 3 calls, right, that's just inbound, outbound, whatever the case, that's my experience for that call, right? The software that Root possesses, it will place 500,000 calls within like a 10-minute period. And then out of that, it gives them a rating. Okay, this software dropped 20 calls versus the 500,000 calls that were made. And that's just an example. That's not the exact number, but that's how the Root software works. And that's why the scientific testing is still important. So let me know your thoughts on this in the comments. Like, share, subscribe. See you in the next one. Peace.